Morning folks, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School. What I thought we would do today is make a paracord hammock, and honestly I had to come out here and make an example of this for an upcoming class anyway, so I just thought while I was doing it I might as well film it so it's more content to the channel and more knowledge out there. I did a similar video to this many years ago, probably at least 8 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. That's probably still on my channel. But this will be kind of an updated situation. Now you're going to need a couple 100 feet of paracord to do this. So weight is not a reason to do this because it's going to be fairly heavy. It's going to weigh what 2 bundles of paracord would weigh. The advantage to something like this is it's something that you can, a skill that you can understand how to do so that you can make it with any type of strong cordage. If you have access to it and you don't have a way to get yourself up off the ground, you can utilize this method to make yourself a hammock. You can also use the same method to make any type of cargo netting or hold down netting, up to and including traps and things like that that are made of net. And this is a very simple netting method. It's not the needle and gauge woven method. It's just a simple method of overhand knots. So we've started at the top of our line with just a lark's head type knot, where we've put a girth hitch over the line and pulled 2 lines through it. What's important to understand is how big this thing needs to be, because that's going to dictate how much paracord you use. I chose to start with mine at a width of up to my neck, standing up here above the line. That's going to give me plenty of width in this hammock. And I made my lines about almost half again that width, understanding knots are going to take up part of that line. As far as length goes, I'm using 4-inch meshes, and I used my knife to measure those meshes. I'll show you that in a minute, on the top of my line. And I'm going to use 4-inch meshes throughout. So if I got a 4-inch mesh, that means I have to times how many meshes I need by 4 inches. I want an 8-foot hammock, so to get that 96 inches divided by 4, I had to have 24, I believe it was, meshes. So I've got to have 24 spaces here in between everything. That dictates how many down lines you have to put on your cross line. So let's get a closer look at this real quick and then we'll begin. So I made some of these black and some of these orange just so you could see better what I was doing when I tie the knots. And a girth hitch is very simple. All you're going to do is you're going to take your line and divide it at the halfway point. Come up here to that loop that you've created, or that bite. Pull that bite over the line in one direction or the other and pull your lines through it. Now, if I do it this way, it's going to put the girth hitch on the wrong side because I'm trying to keep all of my knots uniform. So if I pull it through this way, it puts that girth hitch on this side of the line, which matches everything else. Then I just took my knife blade, because I'm trying to get a 4-inch mesh, and my knife blade is 4 1/4. So I just measure from the beginning of the blade to the center of the next knot, and that gives me that 4 1/4 all the way down, or 4 all the way down, considering the thickness of my cordage. It's an approximate, it's not perfect. And then to measure my meshes going down, I'm just going to use 4 fingers to assume that's 4 inches, so that when I start tying my knots, I'll tie them right at the base of 4 fingers. And that'll give me a 4-inch mesh. When I have a complete square, I should have a 4-inch mesh there. Okay, so as we start to make our meshes in our rope here, we want to try to keep them the same size. The easiest way to do that when you're making nets the old-fashioned way is to use some type of a gauge. And we're going to use our fingers for a gauge, and we really want this first row of meshes to be about 2 inches, or as close to 2 inches as we can get it, because our mesh that we make a full mesh, this is a half mesh, when we make our full mesh coming down here, we want it to be 4 fingers or 4 inches. So we have to make the first one 2 inches up here with a half mesh. I hope that didn't confuse you. Now, to make these meshes the same size, we can stick our fingers in here to gauge everything, but it's hard to do that and keep everything in the right place and then try to tie a knot. So overhand knots, while they're the easiest, are not the best as far as keeping your meshes uniform. What I find to be the best is just a reef knot or a square knot. So I go right over left, and I can pull that mesh to the size I need it to match the one behind it, and then left over right, And then I can kind of dress things up to get those meshes exactly the same size before I crank down on it. And I just use a series of reef knots going all the way across. You can see I tied that one the opposite direction I tied this one. I went left over right, right over left in opposite directions here. That's why your top line's here on that one, your top line's here on that one. If you wanted to make it uniform, you'd want to go the same way every time. So what we'll do with this one is we'll undo that one. We'll try to get ourselves in a rhythm here. I'm kind of dyslexic on top of all of that. So I think the last time we went right, left over right, we're going to go right over left on the first one. Pull our mesh to the right size, and then go left over right. And that is easy to adjust here and here before we tighten things down. That's going to give us better uniformity of everything as we go. And we can stick our fingers in there to gauge things. If it's a little bit tight, that reef knot's really easy to loosen up, to pull it down just a little bit. If you're using overhand knots in there, it's not going to be so easy just to undo that to adjust your mesh size. Then we go to the next one, and again, we'll start right over left, pull it down, get our mesh about where we want it, left over right, pull it in, kind of get our finger in there to gauge it, tighten it down. And we'll just keep going until we get all the half meshes across the top done first, and we left the very first string hanging. We'll come back to that and catch a half mesh going down this side, which will create a full mesh here when we get to the third row. Okay, when we get back and we've done all of the top meshes, and remember those are 2 fingers or 2 inches because we're trying to make 4-inch mesh. This first side mesh is going to have to be the full 4 inches. So we're going to do the same knot. We're going to go right over left, pull it down, and then left over right. And we're going to get that adjusted to the 4-inch mark, so that when it lays, it's laying at the 4-inch mark, just like this. So we get 4 fingers in that, 2 fingers in here. Now when we come in here to tie this one's going to be a full 4 inches, because you're going to have your first mesh right there. And it's going to pull out from here because you're going here next. So now we're going to come here, and we're going to do the same thing. Right over left, pull up. Remember, we want 4 fingers in there, and this will be the one that we'll gauge everything else against, and it should be the same height as this one. And then left over right. Snug it up, check our distance, make sure we're right. Make sure everything looks uniform, and go to the next one. Right over left, pull it up, left over right. Again, using our fingers for a gauge, so we know if we have to loosen it up a little bit. Get everything uniform, and tighten it up. I really like the reef knot for this because it's very easily adjusted. If I don't think my mesh is exactly right, I can always go back real easily and move it, because until I put a lot of force on it, it's easy enough to just manipulate it up or down to get where I want to be, to get my meshes even. Okay, I found the knot right here in my meshes. That's not correct. This is the time to go back and fix that. I inspect my row after I get it done to see where I'm at. To fix that, I'm going to have to untie a couple things. I'll have to untie this mesh. Again, with these square knots, it makes it real easy to do that. And I'll have to untie this mesh to fix that. This knot right here is actually a slip knot. It's not the correct knot. So I need to get that off of there. So I'll just start right here, and I'll go, okay, right over left, pull my mesh up, left over right, pull it down tight. That's a 2-finger mesh. Tighten that up. Now I can come right back here again, right over left, get that a 4-finger mesh, left over right, Make sure I can get 4 fingers in there. Tighten that dude up. This one looks like it's a little bit tight. Needs to be loosened up just a shade. Do that now. Come in here and retie this one. And then I'll be back to the starting point again. And all my knots will be nice and uniform and correct. Inspect your work as you go before you get too far. Every time I get a row in, I go back and look at everything, tighten up my knots, make sure that they're all exactly the same and uniform. You get one of those slip knots in there, and you're going to have issues with your hammock. Okay, so now we have our meshes done. And you can see it takes a lot of paracord to make a very small amount of mesh. I've got a couple meshes that are a little bigger than I want them to be, but it's not going to be perfect because you're really doing it by hand without a real gauge and net needle. It's okay. You're going to be laying on it. It's not that big of a thing. But understand that I had 2 lengths of paracord from my chin to the ground, doubled over. And that's what I used to make these meshes, and it still only made a hammock about 3 feet wide. So if you wanted that thing wider, you're going to need quite a bit more cordage. And I've got almost 200 feet of paracord invested in this now. Okay, so what I did was I strung my line through here just to kind of pull things out tight. I ran a bottom line, just weaved it through these meshes. But we really need to get this secured to the line. So what we're going to do is we're going to untie this last mesh on each one of these. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the same method that we've been tying, except we're going to put one line behind our mesh, or behind our static line, and one line in front. So what we did was we went from the right side to the left side, come up and around the static line, and then we went over the opposite side to tie that same reef knot, except now we've tied that reef knot directly to this main line. So now we've got a reef knot on this main line. And all we're going to do with that is we're going to come over and figure out which side the line's going toward, and we're going to tie a security half hitch on both sides of that, just like this. And then we will cut those tails off and we'll burn them. And that will secure this to this line. So each one of these will be tied exactly like that. We'll untie each one of these reef knots. That's our last mesh. We'll put one in front and one behind. We'll go right to left over the top, left to right to create the reef knot, tie it directly to the line, security half hitch in the direction the line's coming from on each one of these, just like this. So those security half hitches will be going kind of in opposite directions when you're done. And that will still allow it to slide up and down, but it'll give you the security of this knot coming off, and it'll give it a static line like you have on the top with your head rope. So we're going to go through and tie all these, then trim everything off and burn it over. Okay, so got the hammock strung up here with just a couple of pieces of 1-inch webbing, and I put a couple stretcher bars in here because this type of hammock wants to fold up on you pretty bad. My buddy Dutch always told me, don't ever hang a hammock any higher than you're willing to fall. And I'm not willing to fall too far, so we'll just kind of sit in here and see what we got. That's not too shabby. With the mesh being tight, it feels pretty good on your body. I would say if you had a sleeping pad or a wool blanket, and you'd probably be smoothing it in this thing. Couple tweaks position wise and height wise. Yeah, ain't nothing wrong with this. This is smoothing it right here. All right, so what we've done here is we have put a couple spreader bars in because these type of hammocks want to climb in on you really bad and close you up. I've gathered up the end loops You put a piece of 1-inch web strapping through that, just tubular webbing you can buy off Amazon, and tied it up to the trees. Adjusted the height and things for the stretch of the paracord, and climbed in this bad boy, and I'll tell you what, there's nothing wrong with this whatsoever. You're talking about a project that takes some time to create, no question about that. But once you got it, I mean, it's a cargo net, it's a hammock, it's whatever you want it to be, and it's pretty much permanent until the paracord rots. Would this be something that I would want to carry with me and sleep in every single night? No, not when I get to buy a commercial hammock. But it's a good skill to understand, it's a good skill to know. It shows you an easy way to make nets, again with reef knots instead of overhand knots. It's more adjustable that way and easier to get right that way, to get your meshes fairly even. And it makes a dandy hammock if you want to go that route. So I just thought I'd share that with you guys today and share that little project with you while I was down here working on it. It is a project that they will complete in our Pioneer Scout class. They'll have to make a hammock to get themselves up off the ground. We change things around in our Pioneer Scout class depending on the seasonality. Right now it's really hot, really muggy, really wet. Lots of ticks, lots of bugs, lots of snakes. So getting yourself up off the ground is important. There's a couple ways to do that. You can build a raised bed, or you can take the 3 or 4 hours it takes to weave a hammock, carry that thing anywhere you want to go, instead of building a raised bed every time. Of course, you can carry that little handy dandy sleeve and make yourself a raised bed that way. But again, this doesn't require cutting any material but 2 small sticks to use for spreader bars, and you're ready to rock and roll. I appreciate your support. I appreciate your views. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, and for our business. To all our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends, and I hope you enjoyed this video on how to make a paracord hammock. I'll be back with another one as soon as I can, guys. Thanks.